Hey, and welcome back to another video. So in this video, we'll be taking a look at the Microsoft Lumia 950XL and answering the question of whether this phone is still usable in 2021. Now, I already did a video on the Lumia 950, which you can find up there last year in 2020. And if you already haven't seen that video, you can go check it out. But I'm pretty sure most of you would have already seen it, considering it was one of my most popular videos and pushed this channel really forward into what it is today. The 950 and the 950XL basically are identical phones, despite some size differences and processor differences and stuff that generally on the surface identical. And most of what I say for this phone applies for that phone, and some stuff that I said for that phone applies to this phone. And despite that video being in 2020, it's the same here in 2021. So you can take it as 950 in 2021 as well. Before we jump right in, please consider hitting that like button, as it helps this video get on YouTube's algorithm, and also hit that subscribe button if you like what you see and you want to see more content like this. I'm also on Instagram, Discord, and Twitter, and you can follow me on those using the links down in the description below. Now let's jump right into this video. So you may have noticed already that the slider on this video is segmented into many sections, which you can skip to if you want to see a specific section. So you have that option available. Firstly, we are going to talk about some history on this phone. Now, the 950 and the 950XL were released in 2015 by Microsoft and were basically the last resort for Microsoft in reviving lost interest in Windows Phone. Windows Phone was on a downward spiral to obsolescence, and the 950 and the 950XL alongside the 650 were basically Microsoft's last-ditch attempt at trying to revive Windows Phone. Sadly, we know that this was not the case, and these phones were generally towards the negative side in terms of reviews and stuff. The software and stuff was great, the cameras were excellent, but people kind of hogged on the design and stuff here, because we'll be talking about all the issues that plagued this phone and why it was a failure, despite it was Microsoft's best attempt at reviving Windows Phone. There's a lot to talk about this thing over the course of this video. The 950 and the 950XL here in 2021, if you want to buy one, the 950 goes from around $50 to $100, but the 950XL can go in excess of $150 to $200, even $300 depending on its condition. So it's considerably more expensive than the 950, and it's got to do a lot with its camera performance and a few other things, and it just generally the people factor, considering it's the XL variant. I got this thing for a mere $30 or $40, so I kind of got lucky. And I've done a video on it, which you can find up in the card above here, so that there's extra content for you if you want to watch more 950XL content. So firstly, we're going to have a quick go around of the phone, and then we'll talk about all the other specs as well. So taking a look at the phone, we can see that we have the speaker grill up here, and below it is the Microsoft branding. On this side, we have the single front-facing camera. And towards the bottom, we have the front-facing microphone, which is kind of a large cutout compared to other phones. And overall, the front is generally a very minimalist design. Towards this side, we have the volume rockers and the power button in the center of the volume rockers. We have the camera shutter button over here as well. Towards the top, we have the single headphone jack, 3.5mm headphone jack. On this side, we have absolutely nothing. And at the bottom, we have the USB-C port and a place to put your finger like that and pull the back cover. At the back of the phone, we have the Microsoft Windows logo etched into the body here with a contrasting chrome color. The PureView Zeiss branding as well in the middle here. The triple LED flash and the main camera on a considerable bump, as you can see there. And the speaker as well towards that side. Overall, a very minimalist design. Now, speaking of design, we all know that the design of this phone was heavily criticized at its price range, because a lot of phones within that price range were built of metal, had better thermal performance, and felt overall much better than the 950 and the 950XL. The 950 and the 950XL are a huge downgrade from the old school Nokia polycarbonate unibody designed phones such as the 920, the 1020, etc., etc. Those phones felt really solid despite being made from polycarbonate bodies. But the 950 and the 950XL feel really cheap. They are really plasticky, and they're just not comparative to the other phones at their price range at the time. This was one main reason that they failed. It's because they're built of plastic. This plastic was also pretty horrible at dispersing the heat from the processor, which we'll talk about later in the processor section. And this made the phone overheat, and it also gave it a very bad battery life, because overheating generally means the battery is dying faster because it's using up more energy. So the design on this phone was definitely not ideal, and was definitely not up to par for its price range. The sad part is that the 960 prototype, which you can see here, is made out of metal. And if it was ever released, it could have definitely revived the Windows Phone lineup in some way or another, because it was generally considered to be a better phone, basically based off what I can find about it online. So definitely a contender to have been a better phone. Sadly, the 960 was never released, and it was only in prototype stage, and that is a leaked image that I found online of it. However, that thing was built of metal when compared to the plastic body of the 950 and the 950XL. We can now move on to talk about my favorite part of the Microsoft Lumia 950XL, and that is its display. The display on this thing is a gorgeous AMOLED panel. It is 5.7 inches with a resolution of 1440 by 2560 pixels, which gives it a rough pixel density of around 518 pixels per inch, and an aspect ratio of 16:9. It is also protected by Corning Gorilla Glass 4. Now, I mentioned in my 950 video as well, the display on that was really gorgeous, and it easily beat out any display at the time back in 2015, namely the Samsung Galaxy S6's Super AMOLED display. I've seen the Galaxy S6's display. The 950 and the 950XL's displays easily beat out the display on the Galaxy S6. The 950's display is just smaller than the 950XL's display, but apart from that, the technology is the same. For an AMOLED display in 2021, it easily beats out all the LCD displays that I've seen in 2021, and can to a certain extent, I'd say, compete with the mid-range to lower-end AMOLED displays from 2021. It is accurate. The colors are accurate. They're sharp. They're clear. They pop. They're not dull. They're not overly saturated. And overall, brightness is also great. It performs well in outdoor bright conditions. Overall, a very solid display. I was very happy with using this display here in 2021. Absolutely zero complaints. It is a gorgeous display, and it was definitely the best display of its year. I used this in many different conditions, and I can say that I'd easily be happy using this display here in 2021. So that was the display for the Microsoft Lumia 950XL. One of my favorite parts, if not my most favorite part on this phone, easily. So moving on to the internal hardware on the Microsoft Lumia 950XL, and that we can see it is powered by a Qualcomm Snapdragon 810, which is a 20 nanometer processor and is an octa-core processor with 1.5 gigahertz on 4 cores and a 2 gigahertz clock speed on the other 4 cores. This is a MSM 8994 variant of the Snapdragon 810, so the MSM 8994 variant, and it is built on a 20 nanometer scale. Now, the Qualcomm Snapdragon 810 was an iffy processor. It was powerful, however, it had thermal issues, and the design of the 950XL did not do well for that processor. It had issues dissipating heat, and it generally would cause the phone to overheat and would reduce the battery life as well. So not an ideal processor. However, it was made worse by the design issue on the 950XL. This thing has an Adreno 430 as its GPU, and it has 3 gigs of RAM with an internal memory of 32 gigs, and you can expand that with a micro SD card slot. So the processor on this thing, I'd say to a certain extent was somewhat overkill, because Windows Phone has shown over time it does not need too much processing power. Most of the processing power would have gone for image processing and gaming and stuff. But if you're generally using this phone for day-to-day use, like browsing the web, social media, stuff like that, the processor, even at the time, was more than enough for this phone, actually a bit too much. The processor on the 950, this one up here, I forgot off the top of my head which model the processor was, that was more towards the ideal side. However, that thing also overheated to a certain extent. But Windows Phone has shown over time that it does not need too much processing power, and we'll be talking about that even more in the software section of this video, which will be coming up shortly. However, I never noticed any lag or anything in terms of processing power when I did heavier tasks on this phone, browsing, gaming, whatever. It held this phone perfectly, and this phone will definitely benefit from the extra processing power if people want to install Windows 10 ARM, or even in a few coming months Windows 11 ARM. Then only will that processing power come into play. But at its time, it was just a bit overkill, in my personal opinion. But that was the internal hardware on the Microsoft Lumia 950XL. So now let's move on to the most important portion of this video, I'd say a governing portion, a major governing portion of this video, which is software. So on the surface, the Microsoft Lumia 950XL runs Windows 10 or Windows Phone 10, Windows Mobile 10, whatever the hell you want to call it. And personally, it is one of my favorite operating systems of all time. I used a bunch of Windows phones back in the day running Windows Phone 10 and even Windows Phone 8. I just love the customization, the wallpaper tiles, the color customization with matching icons, the tiles, you could move them around, change their sizes, just so much of customization built into this phone, as well as the ability to change the icon center with color matching to the operating system that you've selected. Just a bunch of great customization options that I really loved. My favorite being the tile wallpaper that you could change with transparency and all that stuff. However, we should go on to talking about the elephant in the room, which is the App Store, or the Windows Phone Store, if you may. Now, the Windows Phone Store, or the Microsoft Store, officially ended its support on January 14th of 2020. And most of all the social media apps were gone by 2019, before the store was even stopped being supported. And most of the social media apps were taken off because of the security risk. They were no longer officially supported, and there was a serious security risk that Facebook, Instagram, and a couple of other major social media sites did not want anything to do with Windows phones. Basically, the security issues that came with a lack of updates. There's still a few of them up. You can get Telegram, Spotify, you can get TikTok. There's a few available. However, these are also out of date, and it's not ideal to be using them. Viber is also still here for some strange reason. WhatsApp is no longer there, but the WhatsApp desktop and iTunes and stuff that you see here is actually not for the phone, and instead, if you go and select it, you actually cannot install these things on the phone, and instead they can only be installed on your desktop, because for some reason they do appear on the mobile version as well. And as you can see, it says available on PC, so you cannot install them on your phone despite them being visible over here, and that's the case for many of these apps. However, a few of them will still install on the phone. However, I personally recommend you avoid these apps, or avoid side loading them if they're possible, because they lack all the security features of modern day, and they are a risk if you try and log in. Now, you can use your browser for social media. However, again, logging into a social media account on a phone that is no longer supported poses a huge security risk, and if I was you, I wouldn't do that. Also on the App Store, there is a bunch of third-party apps that pose as major social media apps. These are port apps and are not licensed by any other social media sites. Absolutely do not download these apps. You will get your social media stolen or hacked into or whatever. I'd like to also add in that if you already have some of the older social media apps installed on your phone, I'd still recommend logging out of them if you already have logged in, and not use them because they're no longer supported, they're not stable, they're not safe, they just pose a security risk to your social media. So if you already have them, I'd recommend not using them on your Windows phone. There are a bunch of other apps available as well, and they will stay available until the store is finally closed in the future. If it were to happen, the servers are taken down. We don't know exactly when that day will come, but I can assume that it'll be within at least the next 2 or 3 years. One of the main reasons Windows Phone failed, now we're getting to this part, is the lack of polished apps. Apps usually came later to the Windows Phone store. First, they'd always come for iOS, then Android, and then finally the app developers, if they have some free time on their hand, they'll port it to Windows Phone. And whenever they did come to Windows Phone, they were unpolished. They were not user-friendly. They used the browser in most cases. The fact that the app showed its icon and then opened the browser to basically use the login and stuff, that was kind of a bummer for many people. It kind of ruined the entire experience. Using the browser was not ideal. Instagram used the browser for a very, very long time, as I remember. I can't remember exactly until when, but the Instagram app used the browser for a very, very long time, and that was really annoying, and it just was not as pleasant as Android and iOS. So that is one reason Windows Phone failed. It's the lack of apps, or the apps that did come eventually were unpolished and really not up to par. In terms of app performance and software performance in general, as you can see here, the phone is fluid and responsive. There's almost zero stutter anywhere you'd find, and the apps that do open and run just fine. So you can expect, even here in 2021, a very fluid experience as you would have back in 2015. The apps would have been a bit better if they were up to date. However, this is basically what we get. It is responsive, it is fast, the apps do open fast and they close fast, the multitasking works perfectly. Like I said, you don't need too much processing and RAM to run Windows Phone, so there's a lot of RAM to spare, even with a bunch of apps open in the background as well. So overall, a very fluid software experience, even here in 2021, even with a lack of support. So for the browser demo, I'll be using the Microsoft Edge browser, as in the future, on the long run, it'll probably be the only remaining browser on this phone when all the other third-party browsers are no longer on the Windows Store, or the Windows Store entirely drops support for Windows Phone 10 by deleting the server or just dropping server support in general. So we can go straight to Facebook login for the first try, and as you can see, the Bing page loaded quite fast. You can change the your search engine depending on what you want in the settings. I'm using Bing for now because it seems to be the fastest on this phone, as it is the default. We can go ahead and launch Facebook here. It takes a while to load. And as you can see, this is what you can get. Now it says unsupported browser at the top here again. Even more reason as to not log into your Facebook account with this. I'm definitely not going to do that, but this is just a demo. So we can now go to Apple's website. It's a bit more, well, it is a really heavy website, so it does take a toll on older phones when trying to load. It has partially loaded, as you can see. The photos and stuff and the animations take a bit longer to load, and some animations don't generally load as well. But as you can see, that's as far as it will load. You can try reloading it, but that does not make much of a difference. Let's go to Microsoft's website. Microsoft, and it takes a while to load, as you can see there. It depends again on your connection, but also on the age of this browser. And we can load Microsoft's website here. It takes a while to load. Again, these are heavier websites, but if you're going to lighter websites, it's not going to be too much of a big deal. So as you can see, Microsoft's website loads a bit better than Apple's website. There are no animations, so that's the reason. So yeah, that was the browser demo for the Microsoft Lumia 950XL. A pretty fast browser for its age, I'd say, but I'd avoid logging into your accounts even using the browser, as there is a security issue. Now for a gaming demo, and we can try and run Asphalt 8, but as you will see here in a bit, the game freaks out and kind of glitches out in the software here. Sometimes it gets stuck and glitched out with the touch buttons over here, but it didn't do that this time. But you will see in a bit that it gets stuck on the initial setup screen, where there's no way I can get into the game after the initial setup, because the button that says next has kind of glitched out. And as you can see, the Gameloft logo is also down there and it's kind of glitched out, so the game is not gonna run perfectly, and it seems to have got stuck here as well, so we're not even gonna get the menu this time. So yeah, that's the problem with games like these. They're bigger games, they're much harder to run, and if they're not updated, they tend to glitch out and freak out on unsupported software. So we're definitely not going to be able to run Asphalt 8. However, there's this old game that I used to play called Wings of Fire on a different Windows phone back in the day, and it still runs just fine on the 950XL. So we can demo that as a game demo. So let's launch the game here, and it should work. There we go. So let's get a game going. Now I'm not great at this game, so what's this? Never mind. Okay. Oh. Yes. So the controls aren't the greatest either. Yeah. So that was as far as I'll go. That the touch controls aren't ideal. You have to kind of use the tilt controls for that game, but whatever. But as you can see, games like that will run, but heavier games will definitely not run on this phone. If you're looking to play heavier titles that are still available, you're not going to have too much of a great experience, but lighter games like that will still work. Now moving on to the camera, which was another major selling point for this phone back in 2015. The camera on this thing is a 20 megapixel shooter with an f1.9 aperture and a 26mm wide lens. It has autofocus and optical image stabilization as well. As you can see here, it says Pure View Zeiss, so Carl Zeiss optics, and it has a triple LED RGB flash, so that also carries on from the standard 950 as well, the triple LED RGB flash. It also has panorama and HDR features as well. It can record video at 4K at 30 FPS and 1080p at 30 and 60 FPS as well, with stereo sound recording. The video sample that I'll be putting in this video will be shot at 1080p at 60 FPS because this entire video is at 1080p, so I'll be not including a 4K sample as usual. I've already done a video comparing the 950XL to the iPhone 12 Pro Max in a head-to-head camera comparison, which you can find up here. In that video, I put more of these samples, and I'm using exactly the same samples that I used in that video for this video because they were a really good set of photos. So if you already have watched that video, you already probably know what those photos look like, but I will be reusing the samples from that video. The front camera on this thing is a simple 5 megapixel camera with an f2.4 aperture and can record video at 1080p at 30 FPS, and I'll be putting some selfies from the front camera as well. Now I can show you around the camera app as well, and I would just like to point out that every single photo you see here is being shot in auto mode, so nothing has been changed in terms of ISO, exposure, nothing will be changed. Everything is set in auto so as to simulate an average user experience. Now I know many people agree that if you mess with these settings, you can take better photos, especially at night. However, we're simulating an average user perspective, and not everyone goes to mess with these settings, and that was the same with that previous iPhone 12 comparison video as well. So just keep that in mind. I also could have used the Lumia camera app, but I don't have it installed and I have to sideload it. But then again, not everyone went ahead and did that either. So again, we're simulating an average user perspective, just to get that out of the way. So over here we have a bunch of advanced settings. We have extra settings over here that you can get into, changing the ratio, the megapixel count, flash settings, etc, etc. That's all over there. Camera, video, panorama, gallery, the settings is over there. You can change the camera from this button over here. A pretty minimalist looking camera app, your average looking Windows camera app, nothing too much. The Lumia camera app was a bit more advanced, so if you have that, you can use that instead, but I'm using this for now. I've also mentioned many times that the 950 and the 950XL's camera look identical on paper. However, the 950XL's camera is slightly better than the 950's camera, despite being technically the same on paper. And this is evident when you compare the two phones between each other. And I will be doing a head-to-head camera comparison between the 950 and the 950XL. So hit that subscribe button so you will be notified whenever I upload that video. However, there is a considerable difference between the 950 and the 950XL. The 950 does perform much better, especially in nighttime conditions. So now let's roll the camera samples from the rear camera, starting during the day and then at night, followed by some video samples as well during the day and at night. And if you, like I said earlier, if you want to go check out that other video, you can go check it out. It was in that card earlier and it will be up on my channel as well if you go look it up. So let's roll the camera samples for this phone. So as you saw with those camera samples, the 950XL does really live up to its legacy of being one of the best camera phones of all time. The photos are sharp, they're clear, they're true to life in color, the exposure settings are right. Everything was just perfect, and like I said earlier, it was all done on a auto setting, so nothing was adjusted. I'm pretty sure it would be looking better, especially during nighttime photography, if it was manually adjusted. But to basically simulate the average user experience, I set it to auto, but even still the photos looked amazing. The video quality was also great, stereo sound recording. The front camera was also really good, as you saw with those selfies, and the front camera video, really colorful, really bright, nothing too saturated from both cameras. Everything was ideal saturation. Again, this was one of the major selling points for this phone, and its camera really does live up to its name of being one of the best mobile phone cameras, and it easily is usable here in 2021. It easily beats out mid-range phones of this year and even probably into the future. It is definitely a major camera contender and a point to which other phones can be compared to. For example, like I did the video with the 12 Pro Max. So it's definitely a comparison point and a phone to look up to in terms of camera performance. Now let's move on to the other features on this phone. Moving on to additional features on the Lumia 950XL, and right off the bat I can say that we cannot cover all the additional features on this thing because there is a lot. There's a whole plethora of additional features that will just take too long to cover in this video. So in the interest of time, we'll be only covering the major ones. Now to start things off, this thing supports Microsoft's Continuum. It's something like Apple's handoff feature where you can continue your work on your PC or a different Windows phone. However, it does not work that well today because it's not supported that much anymore. This thing is one of the few phones on earth alongside the Lumia 950 that has an iris scanner. So the iris scanner can be used for security purposes such as unlocking the phone or other things. And it is not even as close as good as a modern fingerprint scanner. However, it is good for what it is. And obviously you cannot compare it to Apple's Face ID because Face ID is just the fastest out there and it's more secure than an iris scanner. However, it's nice to see an unusual feature like an iris scanner on the 950 and the 950XL. It doesn't really work too well in a night setting, but during the day, if there's a brightly lit room and your face is in focus, it's gonna work pretty good for what it is. This thing also has double tap to wake and an always on display as well. It also has fast charging up to 18 watts with its USB-C port. And icing on the cake, it has QI certified wireless charging as well. As you can see here, it is charging on a Apple MagSafe charger just fine. Okay, now for the speaker demo, I'll make sure the volume is set to max here. It is, the volume is set to max. Its max is 30, and we'll go ahead and play the video. Another video. So in this video I will be doing a full review of the Nokia 2V Tela by Verizon. This phone is also extremely identical to the Nokia C2 Tava and C2 Tenon, so this review could basically be used for those phones as well. But there will be some specific things to this phone, mainly in terms of software, which is related to Verizon, that I'll be talking about as well. I will be giving each aspect of this phone a rating. Now we can talk about battery performance, and we are going to revisit thermal performance as well. Let me turn off the phone here, as you can see here. Now the battery on this thing is a removable 3340 milliamp hour battery, and it has on paper a standby time of 288 hours on 2G and about 300 hours on 3G. It has a talk time of around 25 hours on 2G and around 19 hours on 3G, and it can play music for about 75 hours straight. Now let us open the battery bay over here by putting your finger in that small slot-like thing up there that I showed you earlier. You can pull off the battery cover pretty easily, as you can see there. And we are greeted with the battery, which I mentioned earlier was a 3340 milliamp hour battery. It's a removable battery, so that's good, as you can see here. However, this removable battery was somewhat of a saving grace for it, but it was not the entirely big picture of things, because this thing with its overheating issue definitely had a bad effect on the battery performance of this phone. The battery numbers that I gave you earlier are just on paper, like I said, because in reality the battery on this thing used to die pretty fast because of its overheating issue. It just used to get so hot, and it used to degrade the battery as well, because we all know after that whole Apple debacle of Apple slowing down phones, and they said that it's to keep performance up of older batteries, and now you get your battery health and all that stuff. Overheating is not good for your battery, and if your battery overheats, it degrades. So this thing had abysmal battery performance, obviously a bit better than the 950, but when compared to other phones at the time, the battery performance on this thing was abysmal, and it was one of the main negative points to this phone that a lot of people avoid. Again, it's got to do with thermals. Now, the Qualcomm 810, the Snapdragon 810, is not the most efficient processor either, but still, they could have done a better job with the thermals on this phone. This plastic body is not a good excuse. They could have done better, and they, like I showed you earlier with that prototype of the 960, it was on the way. However, it was too late, and I'm pretty sure they were focusing on the thermals and stuff on that phone. But again, it was sadly too late for Windows Phone. So as a final conclusion and answer, should you be using the 950XL in 2021? The answer is simply no. If you want to get one for nostalgia purposes, they're going to be quite expensive, but like me, you could get lucky and find one for really cheap. So keep an eye out on eBay. You shouldn't be trying to log into your accounts on this thing. It's not safe, it's not updated, it's not really that secure. Logging into your Microsoft account in settings is perfectly fine, but just make sure that's all you're going to do. You can use this for calling and basically everything else. I didn't even bother covering it on this video in detail because they're just basic features, but in the way of apps, you're not going to get too much out of this. You can go ahead and install Windows 10 ARM. There are many tutorials on how to do it. And recently there was someone who ran Windows 11 ARM as well, even in its still beta stage. And eventually when Windows 11 launches officially at the end of this year, there will be more tutorials on how to do that. And I'm pretty sure it will revive this phone in some way or another. However, you cannot use Windows 10 Mobile or Windows Phone 10 as it is right now. So Windows 11 is something promising for this phone. However, I'd recommend you not using this as your main daily driver because it has just so many issues involved. It's kind of sad to see Microsoft's last-ditch attempt at trying to revive Windows Phone. However, because of the lack of apps, the lack of polished apps, and just a distrust for Windows Phone over time, everyone just chose iOS and Android, and the amazing camera and the amazing software experience were just hindered by bad advertising, overheating issues, bad battery life, and just a general lack of design put into this phone when compared to all the other phones that were available back in 2015. So that's why this phone failed, and I honestly wish they could have done a bit better, even though I believe this was their best attempt. And I know they could have done better because we also the 960 prototype that I showed you earlier. The prototype was probably a more refined 950XL and a 950 that we sadly didn't get to see. Hey, I might even get my hands on the prototype in the future and we can probably do a review on it. However, it's extremely rare and it'll probably be extremely expensive, so we'll have to see what happens. Either way, that's the end to this video, and I thank you for watching it again. I hope you enjoyed it as usual, and if you did, please leave a like on this video as it helps this video get onto YouTube's algorithm. Also, if you think that I earned your subscription, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button down below and ring that notification bell as well. Don't forget to check me out on my social media, Instagram, Discord, and Twitter. Thumbs up, and I'll see you guys in my next video.